At 50, Tiger Woods should have been untouchable in memory. He was born on the 30th of December, 1975, and built one of the most dominant careers in sports history. 82 PGA Tour wins, 15 major championships, the youngest player to complete the career Grand Slam, and the man whose run through 4 consecutive majors became known as the Tiger Slam. For years, he did not look like a golfer. He looked like destiny in a red shirt. And that is exactly why the tragedy of Tiger Woods feels so unsettling now. Because when people look at him at 50, they no longer see only the force who changed golf forever. They see the limp, the surgeries, the wreckage. In 2021, Woods suffered severe leg injuries in a rollover crash in California that required extensive surgery. In March 2025, he announced that he had ruptured his left Achilles tendon and undergone surgery again. Then, in March 2026, just months after turning 50, Woods was arrested in Florida after another rollover crash. Authorities said he showed signs of impairment, a breathalyzer showed no alcohol, and he was charged after refusing a urine test. That is the heartbreaking part. Tiger Woods was once the closest thing sports had to complete control. He did not just win, he intimidated. He erased the belief that anyone else on the course had a real chance. Entire Sundays felt decided before they began. He turned golf, a sport built on patience and precision, into a theater of inevitability. So, when a man like that begins to look fragile, it hits differently. It does not feel like ordinary decline. It feels like watching something almost mythic break in public. But the fracture did not begin with age. It began long before the body started failing him. In 2009, Woods crashed his SUV into a fire hydrant and a tree outside his Florida home. What followed was not just scandal, but collapse. Reports of multiple affairs shattered the carefully controlled image that had made him not only a champion, but also one of the most marketable athletes on earth. He stepped away from golf for an indefinite break, and by August 2010, his marriage to Ellen Nordegren had ended in divorce. The man who had once seemed superhuman was suddenly exposed as painfully, destructively human. And still, even that was not the end of the fall. In 2017, Woods was found asleep behind the wheel near his home, and was later linked to a mix of prescription drugs in his system. He eventually pleaded guilty to reckless driving and entered a first offender program. By then, the image had shifted even more. Tiger was no longer just a champion fighting age or injury. He was a man whose pain, surgeries, and personal decisions had begun bleeding into each other. The old aura of invincibility had been replaced by something darker, uncertainty. And yet, somehow, Tiger gave the world one last miracle. In 2019, he won the Masters again, 14 years after his previous Masters victory and 11 years after his last major. It was one of the great comebacks in modern sports, the kind of moment that made people believe redemption could actually be real. For a brief moment, it seemed as if all the pain, all the scandal, all the surgeries had been folded into a perfect ending. But life did not give Tiger Woods a clean ending. It gave him another round of injuries, more rehab, more physical limits, and now another deeply troubling headline at 50. Because that is what makes this story so painful. Tiger Woods did everything a legend is supposed to do. He changed his sport. He conquered his era. He came back from humiliation and won again. But here, at 50, the image is no longer just about greatness. It is about the cost of greatness. When the body starts collapsing, when private mistakes become public scars, and when the man who once made the world believe in perfection begins to look trapped inside the ruins of his own myth. And to understand how Tiger Woods became that man, you have to go back to the beginning, to the child prodigy who was taught almost from birth that being extraordinary was not a gift. It was an expectation. Before Tiger Woods became a global icon, He was a child built inside a very specific vision. He was born Eldrick Woods on the 30th of December, 1975, in Cypress, California. His father, Earl Woods, gave him the nickname Tiger in honor of a friend from his military service, and that nickname quickly became something larger than a family detail. It became the brand the world would one day worship. But long before the trophies and the millions, Tiger was being shaped inside a household where greatness was not treated as a dream. It was treated as a plan. Earl did not introduce golf to Tiger casually. He put a cut-down golf club in his son's hands when he was still a toddler. By age 2, Tiger was already drawing attention for his putting on national television. That is the kind of beginning that sounds magical when people tell it years later. But in an HLLW story, it matters for a darker reason too. When a child becomes impressive that early, he is no longer allowed to be ordinary. He stops being just a boy. He becomes a project. And Tiger did not grow up with small expectations. On his own site, he recalls that by age 9 he made a bold promise to his father. He was going to be professionally excellent. That phrase says everything about the world he was raised in. Most children are taught to hope. Tiger was taught to aim. Most children are given room to fail. Tiger was being prepared, almost from the start, to dominate. It helped create a champion. It may also have helped create the pressure cooker that would follow him for the rest of his life. That last point is an inference, but it fits the record of how early and relentlessly his future was framed. There was another layer to his childhood that made his rise feel bigger than sports. Tiger was the son of an African-American father and a Thai mother, Kultida. In a sport long associated with country clubs, exclusivity, and whiteness, his presence carried meaning from the beginning. He was not just a prodigy, he was a disruption. Even as a young player, he was stepping into a world that had not been designed with someone like him in mind. That tension would later make his victories historic, but it also meant the spotlight on him was never just about golf. It was about identity, expectation, symbolism, and being watched more closely than most young athletes could possibly understand. By his teenage years, Tiger was already collecting the kind of amateur accomplishments that made his future feel inevitable. He won 3 straight U.S. amateur titles as a child and teenager, then went to Stanford before leaving after 2 years to turn professional in 1996. On paper, it reads like a perfect ascent. But perfect ascents can be dangerous. They teach the world to expect uninterrupted greatness, and they teach the person at the center of it that falling is unacceptable. For Tiger Woods, that may be where the tragedy truly began, not in the scandals, not in the crashes, but in the impossible standard that formed around him before he was even old enough to fully choose it. The legend was being built so early that the man inside it barely had any room to grow separately from it. And that is why Tiger's childhood matters so much in this story. People look back and see a wonder kid, a born champion, a future superstar. But what they often miss is that he was trained to carry an image long before he understood the cost of carrying one. He was taught discipline, poise, and competitive ruthlessness. He was taught how to win. What no one could teach him was how to survive the emotional weight of becoming a myth while still being human. And once Tiger stepped into the professional world, that myth would grow faster than any person could control. Then came the part of the story that made Tiger Woods stop looking like a prodigy and start looking like a force of nature. In August 1996, after winning his 3rd straight U.S. amateur, he turned professional. Just weeks later, he won the Las Vegas Invitational in only his 5th PGA Tour start. It felt less like a beginning than a warning. Golf did not seem to be introducing a new star. It seemed to be meeting its future. And in 1997, that future arrived all at once. At just 21 years and 104 days old, Tiger won the Masters, becoming the tournament's youngest champion. He did not merely win it, he shattered it. He finished at 1-8, under, par, won by 12 shots, and turned Augusta into the site of a sporting takeover. For a game that had always carried the weight of tradition, Tiger's victory felt like a violent reset. The old order was still standing, but everyone knew it had already been replaced. That was the moment Tiger stopped being just a golfer. He became an event. Every tournament now carried a second storyline. Not who might win, but whether anyone could survive being in the same field as him. His power, his composure, his precision, even the way he walked. All of it created a kind of pressure that reached opponents before the first tee shot. Other players were competing against par. They were also competing against inevitability. But the truly frightening version of Tiger had not even arrived yet. By 2000, he was playing golf at a level that seemed almost unnatural. That year, he won the U.S. Open, the Open Championship, and the PGA Championship, then added the 2001 Masters to become the only player ever to hold all 4 professional major titles at the same time, a run the world came to call the Tiger Slam. This was no longer ordinary greatness. This was domination so complete that it bent the sport's history around one man. And that is where the tragedy quietly began to deepen, even in the middle of all that glory. Because the more Tiger won, the less space there was for him to be anything except perfect. He was not treated like an athlete having an incredible run. He was treated like a machine built to conquer every week, every major, every era. The world did not just admire him, it consumed him. Every victory made the legend larger, and every year made the human being inside that legend harder to see. That is an inference, but it is the emotional truth that fits what his rise became. Total, relentless, and almost inhuman in scale. By the numbers alone, Tiger's peak was almost absurd. He has 82 PGA Tour wins and 15 major championships, numbers that place him in the smallest, most elite space in sports history. But numbers do not fully explain what he was in those years. Tiger made Sunday feel scripted. He made pressure look one-sided. He made the world believe that if he was close to the lead, everyone else was already in trouble. That aura was part of his genius, but it also created the cruel standard that would later haunt him. Once the world sees you as unbeatable, any sign of weakness starts to feel like collapse. So, part 3 of Tiger Woods' story is not just the rise, it is the construction of the myth. A child prodigy became a global icon, a champion became a symbol of dominance, a golfer became one of the most famous athletes on earth. And the higher that myth rose, the more devastating it would be when the body broke, the image shattered, and the man behind it all could no longer hold the weight of what the world expected him to be. That is where the next chapter begins. Not with triumph, but with the first cracks behind the perfect image. But the first real collapse in the Tiger Woods story did not begin with a missed cut or a bad season. It began with a single car crash outside his Florida home in November 2009. Until that moment, Tiger had been more than a champion. He was the cleanest brand in sports, a man whose image looked almost engineered to be flawless. Then, the crash ripped that image open. In the days that followed, reports of multiple affairs flooded the press, sponsors reacted, and the private life he had protected so carefully became public spectacle. What had once looked like discipline now looked like concealment. What had once looked like perfection suddenly looked like performance. The heartbreak was not only that Tiger fell, it was the way he fell. He had married Ellen Nordegren in 2004, and together they built the kind of family image that made the Tiger brand even stronger. Then, after the scandal exploded, the marriage collapsed too. Their divorce was finalized in 2010. In public, people talked about betrayal, headlines, and endorsements. But in a story like this, the deeper wound is simpler. The man who had spent years controlling every inch of the golf course could not control the destruction spreading through his own home. And once that perfect image cracked, the body began to crack with it. Woods had already played through pain for years, but the next phase of his life became defined by surgeries, rehab, and physical decline. Reuters reported that by late 2025, he had undergone surgery in March to repair a ruptured left Achilles tendon, and then another procedure in October after scans found a collapsed disc at L4, L5, disc fragments, and a compromised spinal canal. Those were not the injuries of a man simply getting older. They were the injuries of someone whose greatness had come with miles of hidden damage. Then came 2017, and with it, another humiliating public moment. Woods was arrested in Florida after police found him in a car, and the case was later tied to prescription medications. He eventually pleaded guilty to reckless driving. Reuters reported at the time that Woods said he had experienced an unexpected reaction to prescribed drugs. But by then, the symbolism was devastating. The world was no longer watching a legend fight his way back. It was watching a man who seemed lost inside his own pain management, his own exhaustion, and the wreckage of a life that no longer looked under control. That is what makes this chapter so dark. Tiger's downfall was never just one thing. It was scandal, then shame, then injury, then medication, then another crisis, and then another attempt to rise. Every time it seemed he might stabilize, a new fracture appeared. Even his miraculous 2019 Masters comeback, which should have felt like the final redemption, now looks in hindsight less like an ending and more like a brief beam of light between storms. Because the years after that brought more surgeries, another devastating rollover crash in California in 2021, and still more uncertainty about whether his body could ever truly carry him again. And maybe that is the cruelest part of Tiger Woods' tragedy. He was strong enough to beat the best golfers in the world. He was even strong enough to come back from disgrace and win again. But some battles do not end when the crowd stands up and cheers. Some battles move into the body, into the private hours, into the silence after the headlines fade. And for Tiger Woods, that silence kept getting heavier. By the time he reached 50, the question was no longer whether he could still inspire people. It was whether the man behind the legend had ever really escaped the damage at all. And yet, somehow, Tiger Woods refused to disappear. That is what makes this part of the story so painful. After the scandal, after the divorce, after the public humiliation, and after the first waves of physical breakdown, Tiger still found a way to come back. In 2019, he won the Masters for the 5th time, 14 years after his previous Masters title and 11 years after his last major championship. It was one of the most emotional comebacks in modern sports, the kind of victory that made people believe that maybe the worst was finally over. But with Tiger Woods, redemption never stayed simple for long. Because the version of Tiger that returned in 2019 was not the same man who once terrorized golf courses in his 20s. He was older, more fragile, and carrying years of physical damage. By 2025, Reuters reported that Woods had undergone surgery in March for a ruptured left Achilles tendon. Then, in October 2025, he underwent another back procedure after doctors found serious disc problems in his lumbar spine. These were not minor setbacks. They were signs of a body that had been through war. And still, he kept trying. That is the tragedy of Tiger Woods in its purest form. He is not heartbreaking because he failed early. He is heartbreaking because he kept fighting long after his body had begun, telling him the price was becoming unbearable. Every comeback now seemed to demand another surgery, another rehab cycle, another stretch of pain, and another act of faith that he could somehow do it again. That part is an inference from the pattern of repeated injuries and returns. But it is exactly why his story has become less about dominance and more about endurance. Then came the 2021 crash in California, one of the darkest moments in his entire life. Woods suffered serious leg injuries that required extensive surgery. For many people, that should have been the end of the competitive dream. It was no longer just about a damaged back or a painful swing. It was about whether the man could even walk normally again, let alone contend on the biggest stages in golf. And maybe that is why the latest headlines hurt so much more than the old ones. In March 2026, only a few months after turning 50, Woods was arrested after a rollover crash near his home in Florida. Reuters reported that his Land Rover overturned after clipping a truck trailer while overtaking at high speed. Authorities said he showed signs of impairment. The breathalyzer found no alcohol, and he refused a urine test, leading to an additional misdemeanor charge. No injuries were reported, but the symbolism was devastating. Here was a man who had already survived scandal, addiction fears, surgery after surgery, and a near career-ending crash, and yet he was once again in the kind of headline that makes people stop and ask whether he has truly escaped anything at all. That is what makes this chapter feel heavier than a normal sports decline. Tiger Woods already gave the world the miracle comeback. He already gave the crowd the moment they wanted. He already proved that a fallen icon could rise again. But life did not reward him with peace after that. It gave him more pain, more procedures, more uncertainty, and one more public collapse at an age when he should have been settling into legacy rather than fighting to hold himself together. So, Part 5 of Tiger's story is not just about survival. It is about the cruel truth that surviving is not always the same as healing. He came back. He inspired the world. He lifted another major trophy when almost no one thought he could. But the deeper wounds never fully disappeared. And as the years went on, it became harder and harder to tell whether Tiger Woods was chasing one more victory or simply trying to outrun the wreckage of everything that had already happened. At 50, the saddest thing about Tiger Woods may no longer be what he lost on the golf course. It may be what his life now seems to say about the cost of surviving everything and still not finding peace. Because by this point, Tiger is no longer just a former champion trying to extend a career. He is a man living inside the aftershock of his own legend. The official PGA Tour profile still places him among the giants of the game, with 82 PGA Tour wins and 15 major championships, while his 2019 Masters win remains one of the most celebrated comebacks in modern sports. But that glory now sits beside a very different reality: repeated surgeries, chronic physical limitations, and another arrest after a rollover crash in Florida in March 2026. That is why this chapter feels heavier than the earlier scandal years. In the past, people could still tell themselves Tiger was just going through a phase, or that one more comeback would restore the old story. But Reuters reported that after surgery for a ruptured Achilles tendon in March 2025 and a lumbar disc replacement in October 2025, Woods returned only briefly for the TGL Finals in March 2026, where he admitted how much harder recovery had become with age. Days later came the Florida rollover crash and DUI charge. At that point, the pattern no longer looked like bad luck. It looked like a life still struggling to stabilize. And that is the emotional center of Tiger Woods' tragedy at 50. He already gave the world the miracle comeback. He already proved that humiliation was not the end. He already rose high enough after disgrace and injury to make people believe in redemption again. But redemption did not protect him from more pain. It did not stop the body from breaking down. It did not prevent another public incident from dragging his name back into the kind of headline that makes people feel less awe than worry. That is partly an inference, but it is strongly supported by the sequence of events reported over the past year. There is also something especially heartbreaking about what time has done to the Tiger myth. In his prime, he made the sport feel smaller than he was. He intimidated fields before the tournament even began. He turned pressure into a weapon. Now the conversation around him is no longer about whether he can dominate Augusta or chase another major. It is whether he can recover, whether he can stay healthy, whether he can avoid another collapse, and whether he will even play events like the Masters at all. Reuters reported on the 27th of March 2026 that Donald Trump said Woods would not be playing in the Masters scheduled for April 9 to 12, though Woods might still attend. That shift is brutal, not because athletes are supposed to stay young forever, but because Tiger Woods once represented something bigger than winning. He represented control, precision, ruthlessness, near perfection. So when a man once defined by total command begins to look physically compromised and personally unsteady, the contrast becomes almost unbearable. The fall feels larger because the height was almost unreal. That contrast is an interpretation, but it is exactly why his story hits harder than an ordinary sports decline. And maybe that is the real heartbreak of Tiger Woods at 50. He is still here, still fighting, still trying, still refusing to disappear. But survival, by itself, is not the same as healing. The trophies are permanent, the legacy is secure, the legend will never die. Yet the man behind it all still seems trapped in a cycle of pain, recovery, expectation, and public scrutiny that never fully lets him rest. For someone who once conquered golf so completely, that may be the one battle he was never able to win. In the end, the tragedy of Tiger Woods is not that he fell, it is that even after everything, the world still cannot stop measuring him against the impossible version of himself. That is what makes his story hurt in a way most sports stories do not. Tiger Woods is not simply a great golfer growing old. He is one of the most consequential athletes ever to touch a sport. He changed golf's audience, its money, its energy, and its meaning. He won 15 major championships and 82 PGA Tour events, and his 2019 Masters victory remains one of the defining comebacks in modern sports. That legacy is permanent. Nothing that happens now can erase it. And yet, permanence is not the same as peace. At 50, Woods stands in a strange place that feels almost unbearably sad. The legend is complete, but the man still looks unfinished in his suffering. Reuters reported just days ago that after returning briefly for the TGL finals, Woods was arrested following a rollover crash in Florida, with authorities alleging impairment and charging him after he refused a urine test. Separate Reuters reporting also said he will not play in the 2026 Masters. So while his career is secure in history, his present still feels fragile, unstable, and painfully unresolved. That contrast is what gives this story its final weight. Tiger once represented total control. He was precision under pressure. He was the athlete who made entire tournaments feel over before they began. Now the conversation around him is not about domination, but recovery. Not about intimidation, but limitation. Not about whether he can conquer the sport, but whether he can keep himself steady at all. That is an interpretation, but it is the clearest emotional reading of where his public story stands now. There is also a deeper loneliness inside a life like his. When someone becomes a myth that young, the world rarely lets him age like a normal man. It keeps asking for one more miracle, one more comeback, one more glimpse of the old Tiger in the red shirt. But bodies do not care about mythology. Pain does not care about legacy. Time does not care how loudly the crowd once roared. Woods' recent surgeries, including his ruptured Achilles repair and lumbar disc replacement in 2025, are reminders that even the greatest athlete can reach a point where endurance itself becomes the story. So the final truth about Tiger Woods may be this. He already won everything that matters in golf, but he never fully escaped the damage that came with becoming Tiger Woods. The trophies made him immortal in sport. They did not make him invulnerable in life. And maybe that is why his story feels beyond heartbreaking now. Because when the applause fades, what remains is not just a champion, it is a man who gave the world greatness, carried more than most people could survive, and still seems to be searching for a peace that fame, money, and history could never give him.